The morning I found my son bleeding on the floor of that barn, I had been on my way to return a casserole dish to my neighbor. That's the kind of ordinary Tuesday it was supposed to be. The kind of Tuesday where the biggest decision you make is whether to take the long road home past the old mill or cut through Miller's Creek. I had chosen the long road, and that choice is the only reason my son is alive today. I'm 63 years old. I raised 2 children by myself after my husband passed, worked 31 years as a school librarian, and I have never once in my life described myself as someone who acts on instinct. I'm a planner. I make lists. I keep a paper calendar on my refrigerator with color-coded entries. But when I turned down Hargrove Road that morning and saw my son's truck parked at an odd angle outside the old Pelham property, the farm his father-in-law had inherited and never once let our family set foot on, something shifted in my chest. Not fear, exactly. Recognition. The way you recognize a wrong note in a song you've known for 40 years. I almost kept driving. I told myself I was being foolish. My son was probably just helping with a fence repair, some errand his father-in-law had guilted him into. That man had a talent for guilt. I had watched him work it on my son for 6 years, ever since my son brought his wife home and her father looked at me across the dinner table and smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't reach anything above the mouth. I pulled over. I sat for a moment with both hands on the steering wheel. Then I got out of the car. The barn door was unlatched. Not open, just unlatched, the way a door looks when someone closed it in a hurry and didn't care whether it caught properly. I pushed it open and the smell hit me first, cold air and something metallic, and underneath it the particular stillness that doesn't belong in a space where animals have ever lived. I called my son's name. Nothing. I stepped inside. He was in the back corner, behind an old hay partition that had half collapsed. He was sitting with his back against the wall and his legs stretched out in front of him, and for one terrible second I thought he was resting. Then I saw his face. I don't need to describe everything I saw. I will say that his left eye was swollen completely shut and that he was pressing one arm against his ribs the way you do when breathing hurts more than you can say out loud. When he heard my voice, he tried to straighten up and made a sound I have never forgotten. "Mom," he said, "you can't be here." I was already across the barn. I was already kneeling next to him with my hands on his face, turning his head gently the way I used to do when he was small and came home scraped up from a fall. His skin was cold. His lips were dry. I asked him how long he had been there, and he told me since the night before, and I felt something inside me go very, very quiet. "Who did this?" I said. Not a question. The way you say something when you already know the answer and you need to hear it confirmed out loud so that what comes next has a foundation to stand on. He looked away from me. He looked at the wall. Then he said, "My father-in-law told me to come out here last night to check on a water pipe. His son was waiting." His brother-in-law, a man I had met 4 times in 6 years, a man who had never once looked directly at me when speaking, who addressed all his remarks to the space slightly to my left, who had told my son at their first Christmas dinner together that the family had a certain way of doing things and that some things took time to get used to. My son had told me this story like it was mildly uncomfortable. I had understood it for what it was. "They left you here," I said. "They said they'd come back in the morning." He paused. He swallowed carefully. "My father-in-law said I needed to understand my place, that I could walk out when I was ready to agree to the divorce." There it was, 6 years of marriage, 1 daughter, 4 years old, with her father's eyes and her mother's laugh, and a man who had decided, sometime in the night, that his daughter had made a mistake and that the correction could be administered by his son's fists in a barn on a property where nobody would think to look. I helped my son to his feet. He leaned on me heavier than I expected. He has always been bigger than me, taller than his father was, and in that moment he felt like he weighed nothing at all. I got him out of that barn and into the passenger seat of my car, and I drove 3 miles down the road before I pulled over again and called my sister. She answered on the second ring. She always does. My sister is 67, and she taught high school chemistry for 35 years, and she has a particular quality I have always admired, which is that she does not panic. She processes. She was quiet while I told her what I had found. Then she said, "What do you need right now, and what do you need in an hour?" Right now, I need you to meet me at Regional Medical. In an hour, I need you to help me think. I'll be there, she said, and that was that. The emergency room confirmed 2 cracked ribs, a fractured cheekbone, and bruising consistent with repeated blunt force. The doctor, a woman about my age with reading glasses pushed up into her hair, asked my son the standard questions with the careful neutrality of someone who has asked them many times before. He answered honestly. He had come a long way to be able to do that, I knew. 6 years of being told that honesty was disloyalty had taken something from him, and watching him find it again in that examination room, even hurt and exhausted, was the first thing that felt like solid ground. My sister arrived while they were finishing the imaging. She sat next to me in the hallway with her hands folded in her lap, and her expression the way it gets when she is cataloging information, sorting it the way she used to sort lab results into what it means and what to do about what it means. "The wife," she said quietly. "Does she know?" I had been asking myself the same question since the barn. My daughter-in-law was a woman I had worked hard to understand because I believe that effort is part of love when love is complicated. She had grown up in that house, under that father. She had absorbed things she didn't know she'd absorbed, but she had also sat at my kitchen table and cried about her marriage and told me she didn't know how to make her father happy and her husband feel like a person at the same time. She had said that to me 8 months ago. I had thought we were getting somewhere. "I don't know," I said. "I hope not, but I don't know." "Then we have to assume we can't contact her until we do know," my sister said, "which means the child is with her at the house." I looked at my hands, which means we need to be careful. My son was kept overnight for observation. I stayed. My sister went home and came back in the morning with coffee and a notepad, and while my son slept, we sat by the window and built a timeline. That is what she does. She makes the invisible visible, puts it in sequence, finds the gaps where the logic breaks down. She had done this for her students for decades. She was doing it for us now. What we had: a man who had orchestrated a beating, a property where it happened, a son who had been told to agree to a divorce or not come home, a granddaughter in a house I could not walk into without warning. What we needed: documentation, a lawyer, and enough information to know whether my daughter-in-law had been a participant or another kind of victim. The documentation part came faster than I expected, and from a direction I hadn't anticipated. My son, from his hospital bed, quiet and thinking in the way he does when something is clicking into place, told me that 3 months ago he had installed a small security camera in the workshop attached to their garage. His father-in-law had been coming over frequently, always when my son was at work, and things had been moved, tools rearranged. A lockbox opened and closed. My son hadn't said anything about the camera to anyone, including his wife. He had simply set it up and forgotten about it, the way you put a smoke detector on the ceiling and hope you never need it. He hadn't checked the footage in weeks. But it was there. I want to be clear about what came next, because I have had people ask me since then whether I hesitated, whether I thought about calling the police first and doing this the straightforward way. I thought about it, but I also knew what straightforward looked like in circumstances like this. And I knew that straightforward sometimes means a weekend charge that gets reduced, and a family that closes ranks, and a little girl who grows up in a house where the story has been edited into something unrecognizable. I called a lawyer I had known for 20 years. She had handled my husband's estate, and before that she had handled a situation for a colleague of mine that had required a particular kind of careful attention. I trusted her the way you trust someone who has stood in a hard place beside you and not flinched. She came to the hospital. She sat in a chair and listened to my son tell his account from the beginning, and she asked exactly the questions you would want a lawyer to ask. Then she said that before anything was filed, the camera footage would need to be preserved and its chain of custody documented, because what was on it would likely matter more than anything else. My son gave me his password. I want you to understand what that meant to him, a man who had spent 6 years being told his judgment could not be trusted, handing me a password and saying, "Do what you need to do." That was its own kind of courage. My sister drove me to the house. My daughter-in-law's car was in the driveway. My father-in-law's truck was not. We sat outside for 4 minutes while I decided. Then I got out. She answered the door in the clothes she had slept in. She looked like she hadn't slept at all. actually, and when she saw my face, her first expression wasn't guilt, it was relief, and something like shame, and those are two very different things to see, and I cataloged both of them carefully. "Is he alive?" she said, the first words out of her mouth. "He's in the hospital," I said. "He's going to be okay." She pressed her hand over her mouth. Her eyes filled. I watched her, and I looked for what I needed to see, which was whether she had known the whole thing or only the shape of it. "My father told me he needed to have a conversation with him," she said. "That's all he said. A conversation." She was shaking. "He told me not to wait up. In the morning he said Daniel had gone to stay with a friend to clear his head." She looked at me. "I should have called you. I knew something was wrong and I didn't call." "Why didn't you?" She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, in a voice that was very small, "Because I've spent my whole life not calling when something is wrong in this family. I don't even notice anymore that I'm doing it." We went inside. My granddaughter was in the living room watching cartoons in her pajamas, and she looked up at me and said, "Grandma," with the particular joy of a 4-year-old who has not yet learned that the world requires her to contain it. I sat on the floor with her for a few minutes and held her small, warm weight and breathed. Then my sister came in from the garage where she had found the wireless hub for the camera system, and she looked at me over my granddaughter's head, and the look on her face told me everything. There was footage. There was more than footage. Over 3 months, the camera in the workshop had recorded my father-in-law making 7 visits to the property. In 4 of those visits, he was accompanied by his son. In 3 of those visits, they had gone through the lockbox my son used for important documents, the deed paperwork for the house that my son and daughter-in-law owned jointly, the insurance policies, the savings account statements. They had photographed documents. They had, in one visit, removed a folder entirely and replaced it with a different one. The lawyer, when she saw the footage that afternoon, went very still in the particular way that lawyers go still when they are managing a strong reaction. "This isn't just assault," she said. "This is fraud. This is potentially years of it." My daughter-in-law sat at her own kitchen table and watched the footage on a laptop and did not say a single word for a very long time. When she finally spoke, she said, "I didn't know. I want you to know that I genuinely did not know." She paused. "That doesn't help him. I know that doesn't help what happened to him." "No," I agreed, "but it helps what comes next." What came next took 4 months. I am not going to pretend it was simple or clean or that it moved in a straight line, because nothing like this does. There were days when the lawyer called with complications. When my son called from his apartment, he had moved out while everything was sorted, and I had furnished a spare room for him and stocked his refrigerator the way mothers do, with the specific foods that meant home to him since childhood. There were days when my daughter-in-law called me, not to ask for anything, but just to talk, which I think was its own kind of bravery for a woman who had been raised to believe that talking about problems made them worse. My father-in-law was arrested 11 weeks after I found my son in that barn. His son was arrested the same morning. The charges included felony assault causing bodily injury, conspiracy, and 3 counts of document fraud. The lawyer had built the case carefully, the way she does everything, and by the time it was presented, there was very little room for the story to be told another way. I was not in the courtroom for the arraignment. I was at my kitchen table with my granddaughter, making the sugar cookies she had been asking about for 2 weeks. I had promised her we would do it on a day when things felt settled enough, and that morning had felt like that day. She stood on a step stool next to me and pressed her small hands into the dough and looked up at me with flour on her nose, and I thought about my son in that barn in the cold, and I thought about all the years that had led to that barn, and I thought about the person who had pulled up on an ordinary Tuesday and chosen the long road home. "Grandma," she said, "why are you crying?" "Because I'm happy," I told her. And that was the truth. Not the whole truth. The whole truth is more complicated and will take more years than I have left to fully understand. But it was a true piece of it, and in that moment it was enough. My son came for dinner that Sunday, the first Sunday he had felt ready to sit at a table with more than 2 people. He sat in the chair that had been his since childhood, and he let me fuss with the food longer than necessary, and he did not tell me to stop, which meant he needed it, which meant I kept going. My sister came. Her husband came. My granddaughter sat between her father and her grandmother on the other side and looked back and forth between them with the satisfied attention of someone watching a story resolve. After dinner, when the dishes were done and my granddaughter was asleep in the back room, my son and my sister and I sat on the porch with our coffee. The October air had a particular sharpness that reminded me of the morning I had found him, but this was a different kind of sharp, the kind that makes you feel awake. "I keep thinking about the camera," my son said. "I installed it because I was scared, and I didn't know what else to do. I didn't tell anyone. I almost convinced myself I was being paranoid." He was quiet for a moment. "I keep thinking about what happens if I'd talked myself out of it." "But you didn't," my sister said. "But I almost did." I put my hand on his arm the way you do when words aren't quite the right instrument. He looked at me. In the light from the porch, he looked like his father did once, in a photograph I have on my dresser, younger than he is now, but with that same quality of having just decided something. "You trusted yourself," I said, "even when everything around you was telling you not to. That's not nothing." He nodded. He looked out at the yard. The last of the evening light was going, and the first stars were doing what stars do whether you pay attention to them or not. My father-in-law pled guilty to the fraud charges as part of a negotiated arrangement. His son went to trial. My son sat in that courtroom for 3 days and told his account, clearly, without embellishment, without once looking away from the question being asked. I sat behind him every one of those days. My sister sat beside me. When the verdict came back, my son reached back without looking and found my hand and held it, and I thought, this is what it means to raise a person, not the protection, the arrival, the moment when they can hold their own weight and reach for yours at the same time. My daughter-in-law has been in counseling since the spring. She calls it the most uncomfortable and necessary thing she has ever done, which I suspect means it is working. She and my son are navigating a future that looks different from the one either of them planned, and I am not going to describe that future in any more detail than that because it belongs to them and not to me. What belongs to me is a Tuesday in October and a casserole dish I never returned and the long road home. What belongs to me is the knowledge that instinct and love are sometimes the same thing, and that sometimes the most important thing you will ever do is pull over when something doesn't feel right and get out of the car. My granddaughter asked me last week to teach her how to bake bread. Not cookies, bread, which is more effort and more patience and the kind of thing that takes a whole morning and makes the whole house smell like it means something. I said yes. I told her we would start on Saturday and that we would not rush it. That is exactly what we did. At Sapphire Revenge, we believe that truth always finds its way into the light, and that the people who love you are often standing closer than you think. If this story moved you, leave a comment below and tell us, what does justice look like to you? And if you're new here, join the Sapphire family. We have more stories waiting that deserve to be heard.